So you've seen it on the news, right? A bill is debated, it's passed, there are handshakes, and you think, great, it's a law now. But what if I told you that's not the end of the story? Not even close. In fact, that's where a whole other kind of secret journey begins. And today, we're going to follow the trail.
So let's get right to the heart of the mystery. A bill gets passed by Parliament. It's official. It's a law. Or is it? Does it just, snap into existence and start changing things? The answer, you'll see, is a lot more complicated and a lot more interesting than you might think.
All right, first stop on our investigation, timing. It's everything. See, a law doesn't just exist. It has to be activated, flipped on like a light switch. So let's put on our legal detective hats for a minute and figure out when that switch actually gets flipped. And the official lingo for this big moment is coming into force. Seriously, that's what it's called. This is the exact point when a bunch of words on paper becomes a real, legally binding rule that has actual consequences. Before this moment, it's just text. After, it's the law.
So how do you flip that switch? Well, turns out there are three main ways. The first one's the most straightforward. Royal assent. The law becomes active the very same day it gets its final signature. Simple. The second one is a fixed date. They literally write a date into the law itself, saying something like, this thing kicks in on January 1st. But the third one, oh, this is where it gets interesting. The law can be brought into force by an order from the governor and council. That basically means cabinet gets a remote control and can push the on button whenever they think the time is right. And just to keep things spicy, one single law can actually use a mix of all three. You could have Section 1 start immediately, but Section 2 waits for a specific date. And maybe Section 3 waits for that cabinet remote control. It lets the government roll out a big, complicated law piece by piece. But what if cabinet just never presses the button? Can a law sit in limbo forever, just waiting to be activated? Well, no. There's this amazing safety net called the Statutes Repeal Act. It puts a clock on it. If a law waiting for that cabinet order isn't turned on within 10 years, it can be officially repealed. It's like a legislative use it or lose it policy. A law can literally die of old age before it ever comes to life. Okay, so we've cracked the case of when a law starts. That's a huge piece of the puzzle. But that just leads us to an even bigger, trickier question. What does the law actually say? What do the words mean? This, my friends, is where the real deep dive begins. And there's a name for this whole process: statutory interpretation. It's what happens when the words in a law aren't as crystal clear as we'd like them to be. And let's be real, language is slippery, right? So this is where judges have to become language detectives, trying to figure out the true meaning hidden in the text. Now, the starting point for any judge is this fundamental idea. It comes from a U.S. Supreme Court case, but the principle is universal. You have to assume Parliament chose its words for a reason. You start with what's written, plain and simple. But as we're about to find out, plain and simple can get complicated fast. And this brings us to this huge tug of war in the world of law. On one side, you have the plain meaning school of thought. Just stick to the dictionary definition of the words, that's it. On the other side, you have legislative intent, trying to figure out what Parliament was trying to do, the problem they were trying to solve. Text versus purpose. It's a debate that shapes countless court decisions. So, enough with the theory, let's make this real. It's one thing to talk about ambiguity, but what does it actually look like when it causes a real problem? Okay, check this out. Imagine a law says all motor vehicles have to be registered. Sounds easy, right? But what exactly counts as a motor vehicle? A motorcycle? Yeah, probably. A motorized bicycle? Maybe. But then think bigger. An airplane has a motor, and it's a vehicle. So does it have to be registered at the local DMV? Suddenly, two very simple words have created a massive headache. So, how on earth do judges solve these kinds of puzzles? Well, they have this whole toolkit called the canons of construction. They're basically secret decoder rings for legal language. One of my favorites is a rule that says words are known by the company they keep. So, if a law lists specific things like cars, motorbikes, and then adds a general phrase like, and other motor-powered vehicles, a judge will assume the other vehicles are things like cars and bikes. Land vehicles. So no, you don't have to take your 747 in for an emissions test. So we know the kinds of problems that pop up, and we know judges have their special decoder rings. But what about the lawyers, the researchers, the people who actually have to dig up all this information to build a case in the first place? They've got their own toolkit too. The biggest challenge for them today isn't a lack of information. It's the total opposite. It's an avalanche of it.
The real skill isn't finding an answer, it's surviving the information overload to find the right answer. And to manage that overload, they follow a pretty strict three-step process. First, you gotta find the right law or court case, which is like finding a needle in a gigantic digital haystack. Second, you have to actually read the thing and understand it. But that third step is the one that can win or lose a case. It's called noting up. Basically, using a powerful database like this one, a researcher can instantly check if the law they're relying on has been changed, or if the court decision they want to use has been overturned by a higher court. It is absolutely critical. It's like making sure your map is from this century before you set off on a cross-country road trip. So, we've been pretty deep in the legal weeds here, right? Coming into force, statutory interpretation, it can all seem a little abstract. But why does this whole hidden journey of a law actually matter to us in our everyday lives? It matters because, well, it's the whole ball game. This entire process, making sure laws start when they're supposed to, and that we have a consistent way to figure out what they mean, that's the bedrock. That is the rule of law. I mean, think about what this gets us. It ensures clarity. We all know what the rules are and when they apply. It gives us consistency, so the law isn't just whatever a judge feels like on a Tuesday. It creates fairness, because you can't be expected to follow a rule you can't understand. And finally, it ensures accountability, drawing a clear line between the people who write the laws and the people who apply them. Which leaves us with one last, big, fascinating question to chew on. In this complicated dance between the written word and its real-world meaning, who really gets the final say? Is it the parliament that created the law, or is it the court that gives it its ultimate interpretation? It's a question that gets to the very heart of how our entire system of government works, something to think about. Thanks for coming on this little journey with me.